Hello, everybody. While we're waiting for Facebook, uh, good morning and welcome to History Matters, and definitely so does coffee. Today, we're going to be talking about democracy. It became, I don't want to say more urgent, but more immediate, given something that I unwisely said on social media, which called out all of the people who don't like democracy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that before we talk about my original plan, which I will be talking about today, which is this conference on democracy that I was at last week. And I will mention it again, but they did actually send me the link to both days that are going to be posted on YouTube. But for now, I posted the first day, which is the opening panel, is the sort of broad discussion about democracy. But before I go into that, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and we are going to have a really interesting talk today. I have a feeling, not just the topic, but also because of the election, I think will play into what we're going to talk about today. I'm guessing. How can you talk about democracy without mentioning election? So I'm got my notes ready to go. So Joanne will talk for about 30 minutes, and you guys can continue to chat away. But if you have questions that are relevant to today's topic, those go in the Q&A. In about a half an hour, I'll be back, and we will get as many of those questions answered as we can.
Excellent. And if you are here for the first time, please say so in chat. This is our, I already forgot it, 189th episode. Every week, Carolee tells me what number it is, and within 3 minutes, I forget, but I believe this is 189th. And so we have a really wonderful, robust community of people who have been coming for many, 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 many moons. Please tell us if this is your first time or one of your first times being here with us live or knowing about us at all, because you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. Okay, now, last week I was out of town. I actually was giving a presentation during our normal meeting time on Fridays. It was a conference at Mount Vernon called The Great Experiment. And it was like democracy from the founding to the present, or something like the subtitle I'm not getting quite right, but that's basically what it was. It was a 2-day symposium. It was a public event, and there were a series of panels, and in a little bit, I'll mention some of them, and I'll talk about some of the patterns and interesting things that I saw while I was there. I did, in the very, very, very quick video that I managed to figure out how to record and get to John and Annie while I managed to have Wi-Fi, which was hard on the road for some reason. I don't know, Mount Vernon took me a while. At any rate, I did ask people to think about democracy, to think about if they have questions about democracy, and I meant that. So during the Q&A, after I talk for about a half hour here, we will have questions of whatever kind, but we can speak more broadly. I might even ask you folks some questions about your thoughts about democracy and where we are. It's obviously a topic that I have talked about many times before. When I wrote my notes this morning and I went to save them in my NCHE folder, it of course said, yeah, you already have something named democracy. Come up with something else. So I have talked about this many times before. If you go to the archive of the other 188 episodes that we've done, I'm sure in one way or another we've talked about democracy. There's just a new spin on it today because of this really interesting conference that I was at, which I'll come back to in a moment. However, I decided I was going to talk about that last week, and then I unwisely did something yesterday, or the night before, actually, I think. Perhaps on Wednesday night. This is bad. You know, I'm about to go to bed and I glance like a num-num at my phone, and someone says something so bad, like just so wrong, and about something that I think is important, like, say democracy, that I end up having to respond. And I don't respond in anger because I really try not to be an angry or insulting person on social media. But I replied with like facts. Yeah, no, that's not That's not what democracy is. And that called out a sea of people lecturing me and schooling me about what democracy really was and what the founders really thought. Wasn't that nice of people to tell me? So either they were teaching me about democracy. You should read the Federalist essays. Or they were just naysaying democracy, right? No one liked democracy. We're a republic, not a democracy. That old favorite, which is constant, never seems to go away. We're a republic, not a democracy. We're a democratic republic. But let me talk about this again, in part because I'm just really stubborn. And in part because I actually think this is important. Excuse me. I think this is really important because I don't think it should be a valid talking point to say we do not have a democratic form of government. We do. And if you want to say, I don't like our democratic form of government, I would like something that is more controllable, say that, but don't couch what you're saying, right? So a few words about democracy, what we are, what democracy is, how the founding generation thought about it, and why, as the person did who set me off on this little trail, saying, well, the founders thought this about democracy, so it's always a bad setup. They thought a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about that momentarily. Okay, so we are a republic, but we are a democratic republic. And I will offer you this tip. If someone says to you, if you say we're a democratic republic, and then someone says, no, we're a constitutional republic. Yeah, our Constitution creates a democratic republic. It's based on representation. It's a democratic form of government. So, constitutional republic doesn't really, the Constitution could create many, many things that can fit under the republic umbrella. So we are a democratic republic. Why are so many people so insistent on denying the fact that we are a democratic anything? And I'm going to come back to the fact that I think part of it is actually a matter of words. Come back to that momentarily. But why do I always get so much pushback? We're a democratic republic. No! Okay, so for some people, I think it's just simple lack of knowledge, which is why I go out into the world and unwisely offer my thoughts about this continually. It's been a while since I had people like jumping on me en masse. And since I had to block so many people in one day, and I can't say I'm on Twitter very often. I'm not really being personal on Twitter anymore. I'm sort of walking toward the exit, but in this case, democracy, I must speak. Anyway, so some people I think honestly just don't understand. I do think for some people, the idea that we are not a democracy or that we are not a democratic republic is a talking point. And for some people, if they see and understand that they are in a minority, that the direction that the country is moving is not necessarily in line with what they would like, they might really be unhappy with a democratic form of government, right? That might not actually be something they like. So some of this, I think, for some people has something to do with that. I think if you want power at any cost, then you're really not going to like democracy, because a democratic form of government is grounded on free and fair elections that people can win or lose without set outcomes. What a shocking concept, right? Democratic governments are, in one way or another, about accepting outcomes of elections. If you deny outcomes, if you refuse to acknowledge you lost an election, and there are systems in play, right? If you honestly think, I'm not sure about that election, we have systems in play to check elections. We have courts where you can, there are any number of ways in which you can say, I don't believe this. But after you've gone through all of those ways, and there's absolutely no evidence of an election being stolen, then you stop. Because then you're just saying, I don't like the outcome, and so I'm just going to pretend like it didn't happen. And as we are watching in real time, that erodes people's faith in our electoral process for no reason other than ambition and a desire to have power permanently. Not a good thing. I think if you see other people in one or another minority group, or at least in the past minority group. Now we're seeing our American demographics are moving, as they always do, in interesting ways. But if you believe that there are other people in one way or another getting empowered as they haven't been before, for some people that feels like an attack, because they feel as though some precedence that they have, some degree to which they are above everyone else permanently, is being attacked. That feels like an attack. It actually is more equity, but for some people, more equity is not a good thing. So anyway, there are any number of ideological, educational, lack of educational reasons that someone might just say, I hate democracy. But let me talk for then a moment here about what we mean when we talk about democracy. And I think part of the complication for some people here is there is democracy as a form of government, right? Like monarchy, democracy. As a form of government, excuse me, to the founding generation, that meant everyone taking part, not a representative form of government. They didn't think that was a great idea. They said so quite often. Pure democracy, right? That's what they thought democracy was. And they were not intending to create a democracy in that sense in the founding period. However, they did believe in democratic governance, democratic practices. We're a democratic republic. I'm going to offer you some quotes here in a moment that will get at this difference. It's one thing to say we are, that the founders said we are a democracy, which they didn't, or to say, well, they didn't really believe in democracy. The Constitution created a democratic government, but not a pure democracy. So two different things, a democracy, a democratic republic. These are two different things nowadays. And I will say here, the reason why I'm saying this about the founding is that meanings evolve, words evolve. What we mean today when we say we are a democracy is not what they meant in the founding era when they thought about democracy. For those of you who, some of you may have already watched my American Revolution lecture course. Yale just put a camera in the back of the room and filmed my American Revolution lecture course. It's free, it's online. If you search for Open Yale Courses and American Revolution, it will appear. And the first lecture talks a little about the course and then offers something like Freeman's top 5 tips for studying the American Revolution. And one of them is words matter. I've said that a few hundred times on History Matters. Words matter. The meanings of words matter. And you have to think about the period we are looking at and reading in to understand what people meant. And the word that I use to explore this is, surprise, democracy. So here are some quotes that I think help, and particularly there's a Jefferson quote that's very handy on this front. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, the word democracy in that era, as they understood it, a form of government where everyone participates personally, for some, the absolute definition of chaos. Now, Alexander Hamilton, one would not expect him to be the world's biggest fan of democracy, and lo and behold, he really wasn't. This was not, he worried about the power of the masses. So this will not surprise you, although it's a very blunt statement. Hamilton wrote this the night before his duel with Aaron Burr. He wrote it to a friend that was sort of like, he didn't say it this bluntly, but if I go, just remember this one thing. And this is the quote from that letter. I will here express but one sentiment, which is that the dismemberment of our empire, really interesting word, will be a clear sacrifice of great positive advantages without any counterbalancing good, administering no relief to our real disease, which is democracy. Okay, so he is saying it's the masses having too much power. It's democracy that is our real enemy. Hamilton, one would not be surprised that he would say that again, given his politics. But so let's turn to Jefferson. Jefferson, in 1816, said that democracy would be impractical in the United States beyond the limits of a town. Democracy in the sense that I mentioned a moment ago, everybody taking part. It just can't work. But then he immediately added a democratical but representative government was a good thing. I'm going to repeat that. A democratical, which is a great 18th century word, a democratical but representative government. That makes sense to him, right? So as what I started out by saying, democracy, everyone taking part, to that generation, doesn't really make sense. Democratic, the people have more power. Some people didn't love that, like Hamilton. Some people thought a democratical but representative government, so the people have power, but representation is in play. That makes a lot of sense. That's what Jefferson is saying in 1816. So I say this in my lecture course, in part because I think my five top tips, and I can't see what you're saying because I've blocked chat. But if someone on chat will post the link to my lecture course, and even particularly to that first lecture, so that people can see this, you'll see that part of why I mentioned this in that lecture is because I don't want my students to be writing in what I call democracy speak, meaning democracy, freedom, liberty, with no meaning attached to any of those words at all. It's not handy. And that's really not handy if you're working in a course on the founding era, when all of those things are being thought about and discussed all the time. The 1790s, and this is the period really that most of my training is in essence, the big political conflict, dialogue, problem of the 1790s is how democratic will this new government be? That's what it broke down to. There are all kinds of other things that people were worried about. But when you look at the Republicans versus Federalists, Jefferson versus Hamilton, things like the Alien and Sedition Act or the response to the Whiskey Rebellion, there are any number of things that you can look at and you can see essentially that over and over and over again, they are debating, to use not quite a spicy enough word, how democratic will this new government be? And there are people in power who have opinions about that. And there are American people who have opinions about that. The revolution taught people a lot about the power of the people. They were empowered in an age of revolution. So the 1790s is about how democratical the republic will be. But they are focused on that. Again, not assuming that the government is a democracy, but wanting it to be in one way or another somewhat democratical, depending on who you're asking. So being in the present, looking back to that time and saying the founders wanted this, so we do too. You know, the founders wanted, we've talked many times about the founder blob, that if you're saying the founders wanted already, you need to take a step and think about if that's what you really mean. But if you're talking about democracy, so many differences that need to be taken into account, and a lot of people like to not talk about them. So anyway, that is my response to the naysayers and the mansplainers who were trying to get at me yesterday and who all got blocked. Now, having stated my case, I want to talk a little bit, I say I still have a little bit of time, about the two-day symposium that I was at Mount Vernon. As I said, it was a public event. The Great Experiment, Democracy from the Founding to the Present, I believe is the official name. Series of panels with experts of various sorts being asked questions. So it was not, and I think this was actually quite good. It was not people reading papers or giving lectures. It was panels and a moderator. And so it was actually conversational. And particularly in this context with this topic, I thought that was really well done. And there were a lot of really noteworthy people there weighing in. I just want to mention a few of the panels. I can't possibly mention them all, but it'll give you a sense of what was going on. And I'll mention one or two that I think had interesting takeaway points. There was an opening panel that had the title of the conference, right? The Great Experiment, Democracy from the Founding to the Present. Had H.W. Brands, Doug Brinkley, me, and Edna Green Medford with Brian Lamb interviewing us. And we were talking in a general way about American democracy, about how it's evolved over time, about how we should be thinking about it now. As you can well imagine, at least from my vantage point, I got all riled up in talking about American democracy in the present. I sent out a link to that on, I think, every social media platform. Someone can post that in chat. That's free and online, and I will post it. And the second day, this was a symposium that people who wanted to be there and be there live and ask questions and take part and engage with the people who were there paid a tidy sum to get all of that. And you now are going to be able to sit back and just enjoy the conversation. So I will advertise it in a better way on every social media platform shortly. But anyway, it's up online, and the first panel is the one that I was on. So the panel that followed ours, oh, and I should say, and so our panel talked about the ways in which we were and weren't democratic, right? The ways in which we've succeeded and really haven't in historical context. Personally, I'm totally biased, but I thought it went really well because the four of us are, shall we say, senior historians. And so I felt as though we were holding forth in a way that was a useful beginning to this kind of a program. So whoever designed the program, thought it went well. Okay, the second panel was about the founders. And it had Denver Brunsman, Lindsay Travinsky, and Annette Gordon-Reed. So I'm telling you, this conference was quite something. And they talked a little bit, again, about the founders, about how we think about the founders. They did not use the phrase founder blob, but it was in my head and in my heart. But they talked about the good and the bad and what Americans do with the idea of the founders. There was a panel that I found particularly interesting called The Role of the Military in a Democracy, and it featured Generals Joseph Dunford, John Kelly, and Jim Mattis. Okay, 3 really major generals talking about the role of the military in a democracy. I'm going to come back to that because that's part of the takeaway I want to mention. There was also a panel called The Art of Interpretation, which was about the Constitution, which featured, and I hope I don't say his name wrong, Judge David Tittel and Neil Katyal, talking about interpreting the Constitution in a judicial sense. Really, really interesting symposium with really informal but knowledgeable conversation in the way that one would hope for. Now, in the military panel and in the judicial panel, and I'll say there were panels on the importance of education with democracy, the importance of and the role of journalism in democracy. You can see, if you go to the website for this and scroll down, you'll see a list of the program and biographies of everyone who attended. So it's all there, happily waiting for you on the internet. But it was, in a sense, the role of the military in a democracy panel and the art of interpretation panel that I came away thinking about an interesting comparison between them. And it linked me to something that we have talked about before. So let me explain myself here. In the military panel, the role of the military in a democracy, these 3 senior generals who, Jim Mattis, John Kelly, have been smack at the center of national politics on the highest level. They made it very clear that military restraint was foremost in the role of the military. Yes, that they were supposed to protect the nation from outside attack. They were supposed to, deal in one way or another with the rest of the world. There's many obvious things that the military does. But what they said over and over again, they talked, and I have to say, I don't know what I thought I would think about that panel, but I came away, they had such a powerful, clear sense of the fact that there are things a military can and should do and things a military shouldn't and can't do. And they made that pretty clear. And they talked about it. I can't remember, you'd have to watch it and see if they used the word restraint. But what came away was the military needs to show restraint in a democracy, in a democratic form of government. And to have these 3 men with that much military power, and they never used the name of our former president. In some cases, it seemed to me they were referring to a former president. They made it clear that they understood the role of a military in a democratic form of government They believed in it. They were committed to it, and not in a way that sounded like they were pleading. It was in a way that was testifying to the fact that that is a fact in a democratic form of government. The military has a role, and it doesn't surpass that role without bad consequences. Okay, so military restraint was an interesting part of the military panel. Then you come to the art of interpretation with Judge Titel and Neil Katyal. One of the main things that panel communicated was judicial restraint. It made the point that when courts, and obviously particularly the Supreme Court, get into the role of, how did he put it? I'm not going to be able to come up with the right word. Essentially policy making, not being restrained, but being an active in a policy-centered kind of way. When courts do that, they are not behaving in a judicially restrained way, and those are the ways in which you chip away at the reputation and credibility of a court. Judicial restraint. And Neil Katyal, particularly, I don't know if he's argued like 48 times before the Supreme Court or something. At any rate, he was particularly, I highly recommend going to find actually all of these panels, but that one in particular, the importance of judicial restraint in courts. Powerful, powerful argument that they made that it's obviously so telling in our current moment. Now, I will say, I'm a little over, but I'll be done right away, I promise. I will say that the symposium was not obviously partisan. There were people whose politics you could certainly tell on one side or the other. But it wasn't as though a whole bunch of liberals got up and said, no, so Neil Katyal, on talking about judicial restraint, was not, again, I don't think he mentioned the current Supreme Court. He was talking about why judicial restraint is important in a general way. And I actually don't know the politics of Judge Titel. I have no idea. At any rate, this wasn't a partisan program. It really was an attempt to talk about democracy in one way or another. Now, here's the thing that struck me this morning when I was thinking about military restraint. I was thinking about judicial restraint. Think about the word restraint, right? Restraint is self-propelled, right? Restraint is you better hold back. It's not necessarily embodied in law. It's something that you ideally voluntarily commit to. Restraint. What that brought me back to was all the talk we've had here on History Matters about norms, about all of the ways in which fundamental norms about American politics, about democratic governance, have been violated, particularly during the last presidency. Norms were just ignored or violated, or in one way or another. And I know I mentioned in a previous episode, I was speaking with a colleague, actually former professor of mine at the University of Virginia, and I was thinking, norms, like I never in my life have I thought about or discussed norms to this degree. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me, I'm maybe more senior historians don't do that. And then this more senior historian said, I thought about norms more than I ever have in my life. So norms are not encoded in law, right? Norms are, well, here's how we normally proceed, because we generally have an idea about what's right and wrong and what should happen. And a norm goes on and on and on and on, but it doesn't necessarily have legal force behind it, which we found over and over and over again during Donald Trump's presidency, that he would violate a Trump of some kind, violate a norm of some kind. And people would ask, hey, can he do that? And the answer is, well, yeah, he's not violating a law, it's a norm. So thinking about military restraint, thinking about judicial restraint, it brought me back to that. And again, made me realize the degree to which one might say democratic norms are undergirding our government, our politics, who we are as a nation. And that's a fragile and vulnerable foundation. Doesn't mean it's a bad foundation, doesn't mean it's going to die, but it means that we need to recognize that. And that's one of the many reasons why We have to support democracy, understand what it is, defend it, be there for it in all of the ways we've talked about in the last 188 episodes, thinking about the importance of norms and the fact that restraint as a thing that's supposed to govern the military or the courts, again, another way to me of, in part, saying norms are important. It's a reminder of the degree to which we can't take things for granted, and a reminder, I promise I'll end in a moment, and a reminder of something I know I've said more than once, which is we're in this moment. I'm going to say this, and someone's going to get bingo. If you're new here, people play bingo every week based on what I say, because I'm predictable in the words I choose. And now I'm going to say contingency. In a moment of high contingency, like the present, it is true that if we make bad choices or bad things happen, it could be very bad for democracy. We could end up in a very bad place. It's also true that in a moment of high contingency, we can make positive change. We can do something to bolster or defend or recognize democracy that will have a positive impact. And I think it's important to remember both halves of that equation. Okay, I think I'm going to stop because I'm like way over. And I'm going to close my notes because you're all starting to say mug, mug, mug. Okay, yep, there you go. Okay, you have me so well trained. Okay, so I didn't have an explicitly like democracy mug, but given that I was talking about, you know, the founders and in general what they thought, I wanted a founder of sorts to hold forth on the fact that it's actually important to know what they really thought. We got James Madison. The mug says, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. James Madison. Okay? Knowledge is good. Information, real information, good information is good. And that's particularly true right now when we're talking about American democracy. Okay. I will now stop talking so that we can have a discussion. And as I said earlier, questions are good. I'm open to people just wanting to have a discussion about democracy. And I will turn to Annie and see what you are getting in the realm of questions.
Well, we've got tons of questions, but also I just want to point out our friend Matt was lurking in the chat again today. Matt, who was the original partner in crime. So I always love to say hi to Matt.
Jazz hands. For those of you who are new, whenever things got testy or I got emotional, Matt would do jazz hands.
I think that's on the old bingo card. But anyway, all right.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I stopped.
Oh, okay. So Francesca, who apparently won some big award, I was trying to follow in the chat, but Francesca got another wonderful recognition. For those of you who don't know, Francesca is one of our regulars who resides over across the pond and writes beautiful children's books. So she just got bestowed some sort of an honor. But her question is, she says, I have no recollection of people openly rejecting democracy in the US. Has this happened before? So she's giving us an across the pond perspective.
And across, well, yeah. I mean, there are different ways to answer that question. There are times when people have clearly been motoring towards something that is not democratic. You know, you have the period in the early part of the 20th century when Nazism, right? Madison Square Garden, that very famous incident where the Nazis held a big rally at Madison Square Garden. If you don't know about that, there's a documentary about it. It's fascinating and horrifying at the same time. So there have been moments, certainly, you know, the United States since the 1790s, right, has been in an ongoing struggle over democracy and what it is and how democratic we should be, et cetera, et cetera. There have certainly been people and times, people who have and times when they have, in one way or another, turned on democracy. Now, it's one thing for me to say that, and another thing for me to say, or to be talking about people who say, no, democracy is bad, we need something else. This is not going to be the first time in American history that's happening, but that's a step further than people turning towards practices or thinking things that are clearly not compatible with democracy, to actually say, I don't think we need democracy, let's try something else. again, as a historian, I never say it's the first time unless I really know it's the first time. But certainly what we have right now is a group of people with a great degree of national political power, some of them suggesting that point, sometimes putting it bluntly, sometimes clearly intending it, but not putting it that bluntly. But it isn't that the idea of questioning democracy in one way or another is new, but the situation of people with power, on a national level, on a state level, not necessarily brand new, but it puts this question in the middle of everything in a particularly pressing way. So it's a combination of the thinking and the ideas and the fact that these people have a lot of power. And that we're at this moment after a presidency when there were all of these norms violated and questions raised. We're fundamentally not sure about where we are. We shouldn't be absolutely sure about where we are. We should be really standing up for what we want. But so this moment is certainly distinctive in its own way. I just want to say before I lose track of it, I just saw, and now I've lost him. Who is it? Someone just said, oh, Jeff. Jeff just said he's here for the first time. And I just wanted to recognize the fact that Jeff is here for the first time. Welcome, Jeff. There. Okay. I'm sorry. Now let's, people are celebrating. Okay. That's good.
Yep. Well, let's celebration. Okay. So our good buddy, Gloria. Hi, Gloria. Asked if Lyndon Johnson followed norms.
Well, let me step back. Am I saying that Donald Trump is the only president who violated norms? No. I think we could march our way happily. Maybe someone will do this. Book idea. March their way through American history and look for moments when norms were deliberately or not deliberately violated by even just presidents, one president or another. I'm not saying that former President Trump is the only president to have done that, but I am saying he did it with abandon. He did it in a way that was striking, to use a highly diplomatic word. Heather Cox Richardson always makes fun of me because I always find these highly diplomatic ways of saying things that aren't diplomatic, but I'll stick with that for now. So we could go to a lot of presidents. I'm not going to talk about LBJ particularly because I don't have a huge database of knowledge about LBJ. What I have in my head is that picture of him leaning sort of towards someone who, giving LBJ influence of a kind over whoever it is he's talking to. I would say he probably violated norms. I would say almost anyone that we point to, we could find ways in which they violate norms. The question is, in what spirit are they being violated? With what consistency are they being violated? For what purpose are they being violated? And how does that mesh with the person's thoughts about our form of government and its ethic and ethos?
All right. Kathy Howe says, I am concerned about Project 2025. Can you speak to that here or in the future as it relates to this topic of democracy?
So I'm not going to talk about that in detail. It appears, again, and all I have seen is some version of probably what many of you have seen, general discussion of it on TV, in writing. So I don't want to issue statements that suggest I've read it in detail like a good historian should. It certainly suggests that should Donald Trump and his supporters take power again, Project 2025 includes a lot of things in it that are supremely not democratic in any way. Using the military to put down protest, getting the Defense Department to attack your enemies. There are any number of ways in which it suggests, and again, I'm by no means an expert and have not read it, so I'm speaking here off the top of my head, but from everything that I've read, and that makes me think of grad students who are like, I read the reviews. From everything, when you say, let's discuss this book, well, I haven't read the book, I read the reviews. But from everything that I have read about it, not had the time to read it, it certainly suggests that Project 2025 is ending democracy as we now know it, and really empowering someone with the powers of, again, depending on how it goes, a dictator, giving someone such a degree of executive power, again, diplomatic, that there's a lot of restraint, political restraint, democratic restraint that will be pushed to the wayside. I'll stop there because I don't, again, I don't want to talk about it in detail without having read it myself, but that's my impression of it.
Okay. Lois, our friend who teaches in Oregon, asked, is one of the norms then to embrace limited government? She's teaching an AP government course this year, and she wants to know if you can define limited government under what you're defining democracy according to the views of the framers.
Okay, limited government. Maybe reframe the question for me.
Is one of the norms then to embrace limited government? And she wanted to know if you could define that in terms of the framers.
Well, this might not be what you're asking, but by definition, our government is limited. If you're talking about big government and small government, that's an ongoing debate. But if you're talking about the fact that our government has limits to it, it does. And it, that's part of what the Constitution does, although we all know constitutional interpretation can do many things. But it is a limited government. And again, checks and balances, separation of powers, these are all ways in which limits are imposed. Even the Electoral College, which I don't necessarily want to talk about in depth because everyone always wants to talk about the Electoral College, but the Electoral College was, among other things, a way to step back from the power of the people. The Electoral College, Hamilton wanted, when he spoke at the Federal Convention, electors who chose electors who chose the president. He wanted like 2 giant steps back from the populace. So there are all kinds of ways in which there are built-in limits to our government in one way or another. I'm not sure if that's precisely what the person was asking, but that's, if you were, that is my answer.
Okay. Romy Fluke, who I'm not familiar with. Romy, I don't know if this is your first time or maybe just your first time posing a question, but either way, welcome. She says, do you have knowledge and opinions about the books by William Strauss and Neil Howe about generations and the turnings of history?
Well, I don't have opinions on those specific books. There's a long tradition of people who think in terms of cycles, history in terms of cycles, and that cycles happen and cycles change. There's an older book that talks about this in an interesting way by Drew McCoy called The Elusive Republic, and it includes within it the way in which particularly Jeffersonian Republicans thought of the different changes that a society goes through, and how, according to McCoy, they were trying to stop, like, okay, we got to this point, can we stop from going further? The idea that there are cycles and changes and that they happen. It's not a new idea. I haven't read those books, so I can't say that I agree or disagree with them, but the idea isn't new. I think, speaking as a historian, generally, it's an interesting idea, but I would never assume that there's some magical combination of things that proceeds in a pattern and that we're stuck on a roller coaster, or not roller coaster, conveyor belt. We're stuck on a conveyor belt of change. Clearly, there are changes and political systems evolve. But as far as the regularity of it and the predictability of it, I might not go so far down that road as some will. But again, I'm speaking without having read those books.
Okay. Our really good friend Cece says she needs help with an elevator talk. Like you get in the elevator and you have 2 minutes to tell somebody something. What would be a brief, simple elevator talk for we aren't a democracy, we're a republic?
Well, we're a democratic republic.
Okay.
Okay. So, and including everything that I just said, you're giving me like a real challenge here.
I want to sound
like, I know. Yeah. I would say, okay, my elevator version okay, let me try it out and I might change it as I go. In the founding period, they understood the United States to be a democratic republic. They did not understand it to be a democracy, meaning a government where everyone takes part. Now we understand democracy in a broader sense as a form of government. And in that sense, the United States is a democracy. It is also a republic. It is a democratic republic, but we understand democracy in a different way than the founding generation did. Don't know if that does the job, but that would be my start.
You're getting a lot of heart emojis flying around.
Okay, that must mean I did something.
Somebody liked it.
Okay, that's good.
All right, our favorite undergrad student, Sydney, is with us. Hi, Sydney. Sydney asks, how can history education help us better engage in democracy, or is it more about political science than history?
Repeat it for me.
She's trying to get to where can she learn more about democracy, I think is the point. Is it history education or political science more so than history to learn about democracy?
Oh, I don't know if we have to have an either or. Isn't there like a social media meme, like, why not both?
Yeah.
Why not both?
Both classes, Sydney.
Political science classes and history classes do different things. That said, I have a lot of political science majors in my classes, and a lot of the people in my classes take political science. In a very general way, political science is interested in broad political patterns, right? And they step back and try and have a sense of how things operate over time in a, what do I want to say? Not necessarily grounded in historical moments, but in a broad kind of there's a word I'm looking for and I can't find it. And if one of you has it out there, it's like, what is it called when you, oh man, it's right out of my head. When you are fitting things into a pattern, I'm not gonna, anyway.
Sounds like a math term, which is why it would not come to my brain.
That's probably why it doesn't come to my brain too. What I'm essentially saying is political science, and I will think of it like in 3 hours, not conceptual framework. It's like, it begins with a C though. Anyway, whatever it is, it's out of my brain. Political science is stepping back in that way and talking about broad patterns. History is also talking about patterns, but they're very focused on how specific events contribute to those. It's not complexity. You guys are good, but that's not it either. So, for example, I once attended a conference, actually a symposium, just like an afternoon thing. And there were a lot of political scientists there who were talking in a very broad way about patterns of American governance. And then they were looking back at the founding period and saying, well, this pattern is true and that pattern is true and this pattern applies. And I remember intervening and saying, well, those patterns are interesting, but the fact of the matter is that in 1798, they couldn't have done any of the things you just said because it was like historically impossible. X, Y, and Z didn't exist at that point. And that to me encapsulated a difference. Not that political science was wrong and history was right. Very different outlooks. So, not construct either. Oh man, you guys are trying so hard. Definitely not chaos theory. If I find it, I will tweet it.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Okay, this one's kind of long. This is from Tom. Tom's a thinker. He always posts longer questions. So I want to make sure we break this up. He says, it seems natural for people who are in political minors and have little chance of prevailing in a democratic government to have some resentment about democracy. Are there ways to discuss the difference between a tyranny of the majority and a system that protects the legitimate rights of political minorities, ensuring we have the latter kind of system?
Well, I think it makes perfect sense to be upset by, resentful of the way democracy functions in a country or in the United States. I've said it before, democracy isn't an end point. It's a process. It's ongoing. And it should be. We should be looking in a general sense at what goes on and thinking about the ways in which things are or aren't operating in a way that makes sense to us, that feels equitable to us, that is spreading rights to everybody who deserves to have those rights, meaning American citizens at least. So I don't think I think some resentment of democracy is not unhealthy, because we should be questioning it all the time. We just shouldn't throw it overboard, right? We should say, okay, how is democracy working? Are we happy with it? Are we not? If we're not, why? What does that mean? How would we want it to function better? And then we can have an honest conversation. If you're suggesting X, are we still a democracy? Oh, okay, you think we are. Let's talk about what democracy is. In other words, that's an important conversation. And saying, maybe resentful has a lot of negative connotations to it, but questioning the ways in which democracy is very obviously not functioning as well as it could, that's important. That's part of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be wrestling with, thinking about, engaging with, and ideally helping to reform our government or our laws in a way that makes things more equitable, that moves closer to being more rather than less democratic.
Okay, so Tom had a two-part question. Here's the other part. How does the body politic as a whole judge when political minorities have legitimate aspirations and they are making unreasonable demands on the nation?
Okay, you have to read that one again too.
How does the body politic as a whole judge when political minorities have legitimate aspirations and when they are making unreasonable demands on the nation?
How does the body politic judge? Well, I mean, we're talking, seems to me, maybe this isn't the sense that you mean it, but we're talking about ideas versus concrete realities, right? That if a minority is making demands of a sort, right, or saying we're not being served, that's worth listening to. Is the solution that they are proposing the best solution? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's where the conversation, we should be having a conversation about that, right? Okay, the body politic, we should be doing what we do here every Friday. We should be informed. We should be talking about this. The body politic should be thinking about what's proposed and weighing options. Now, this is very nice of me to say, but it goes all the way back to the founding generation, that they knew that, it's part of why some people really distrusted democratic modes of governance. They did not assume that the public was going to be pondering and having great thoughts and weighing things in this way. It's the vulnerability, or a vulnerability of democracy, is that the body politic can be swayed one way or another, can be misled, can be misinformed, can be, fill in the word, right? That's part of democracy. It's the very thing that makes it reflective of the body politic, makes it vulnerable to trends within the body politic, for better and worse. So hopefully I'm answering that question. I think I'm answering that question. Annie, I can't tell from your face if I am or if
I think so, but I'm also trying to figure something out going on in the chat at the same time.
Okay. I hope I did.
I think you did. That was a complicated question.
It was.
Okay, Dave's got two. I'm going to start with one. Dave asked, regarding SCOTUS norms, compare and contrast how SCOTUS deciding Brown versus Board to the recent Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Compare and contrast
how they decided those two cases.
I don't know if I can, not sure quite what that's asking.
I think he's just asking you to compare their thought processes in the two cases, maybe.
But before doing that in a way that would be helpful to you, I would want to read more specifics.
Okay.
About not the outcome, but it sounds like you're talking about the process.
Yeah, he's just compare and contrast how they decided them.
Well, here, so Dave says Brown was very thoughtful. Dobbs was not. Well, okay. What I will say, my politics have a strong stand on this, but what I will say is where we started and talking about how things are decided, about judicial restraint. I suppose we could argue about whether we think judicial restraint was shown with Brown, but I think what happened with Dobbs was a different level of advocacy of a sort from the court. But again, this is a big and really interesting question that I don't want to jump into and start talking about the Supreme Court and policy making. But that's a very, very, very important thing to discuss. And Neil Katyal was touching on it in such as I said, I recommend that you go find that panel because it talks about this in a really interesting way.
All right, it's 11. We have
Okay.
four more questions. If you, I don't know if you want to take any more.
People are saying Dobbs was reactionary and politically motivated. Well, again, policy and politics. Brown overturned precedent carefully. Dobbs overturned precedent definitely not carefully. At any rate, yeah, there are all kinds of ways in which but this leads us anyway. I'm going to stop and go ahead, Annie, and tell me what's left.
Okay. I don't know if we'll get to all these, but Kathleen asked to discuss why the architects of our society, your founder blob, would or would not want a one-party system or one-party state, as some people seem to be pushing for today. What would the founders blob think of that idea of pushing for a one-party state?
Okay, so number one, they would never believe it's possible. They didn't even believe two parties on a national level was possible. The famous Federalist 10, James Madison Federalist 10, when he talks about factions, will be there, factions will be bouncing against factions. He's not talking about two parties. He's talking about multiple factions bouncing against each other, and that's kind of the way things work. So a one-party state in a general sense, they wouldn't have believed it could happen. In a more specific sense, I would think that for the same reason that they were questioning all modes of governance that seem to concentrate power too much in the hands of too few people, that would not be thrilling to them. They were responding in creating the governments during the revolution and then the Constitution. They were partly responding to monarchy that they had lived under before, that had a supreme concentration of power in the king and also parliament. So not just the king ruling over everything, but they were very worried about the balance of power. That's, again, go and read the debates from the Federal Convention in one way or another, and it makes perfect sense. They're talking about who has power when and how to balance it. One party would not appear to be the best way to do that. It would seem to be setting things up for less balance. So again, without being able to toss off to you handy founder quotes at 11:03, if we had a longer time, I might be able to come up with handy founder quotes, but that would be my immediate response.
We need a handy founder quotes mug. I like that. I like that phrase.
Yeah, I'm really good with handy founder quotes.
Handy founders quotes. Somebody type that so we don't forget it in the chat. All right, it's 3 after. Do you want to try one more?
Let's do one more and then let's switch.
Okay. All right. This one, Dave asked, what impact did democracy in ancient Greece generally have on the thinking of how the founders discussed, debated, and thought about democracy in the Constitution?
Well, good question, because they were constantly, phone is making noise. Okay. I'm bad. Now I'm that student whose phone is on. Okay, so the question, ancient Greece. Okay, so they constantly, in creating this government, our government, were thinking back to ancient Greece, ancient Rome. They were doing what I've talked about at some point in the past, using all of history. It was like a big basket of facts and coming up with what they believed to be broad patterns of how politics and nations work over time, and then trying to deploy that knowledge to create a kind of government that would push things in a better direction than in the past. Ancient Greece, again, to many of them, felt like pure democracy, felt like everybody taking part, felt like something that was not what they wanted. They saw demagoguery also. They look back to ancient Greece and they saw pros and cons, but the cons were scary. They look back to ancient Rome and saw, again, pros and cons. They, read a book that they almost any educated elite-ish man in this period would have read is Plutarch's Lives of the great Greeks and Romans, or the ancient Greeks and Romans. If you want to have a sense of what they're being educated to think and how they're thinking in a general way about Greece and Rome, that's a really good starting point in handy chapters. Okay.
All right.
I will stop there. Okay, let me explain what's going to happen now. We are now going to go to the after party. What this means, Dave, you're getting ahead of me. What this means is that we will no longer be recording this conversation so that we can speak more freely and easily than we were. Not that we were really being stuffy before, but we can talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about in the after party. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, stay right where you are, and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then poof, you too will be in the after party. I say this every week. Today, it's particularly important. Every week I say, thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy. We've been doing it now 189 weeks, which, and it's important in whatever way we've been doing it, however we've been doing it. If we are having conversations in which there's give and take, and we're seriously thinking about our government, our politics, our country, how it works, the state of democracy, we are doing important work. We are. And if you leave this with ideas in your head about what you're thinking about, how things are going on, and then you engage in conversations with others, you are doing important work too. So what we do here may feel like, it certainly feels like to me, a meeting of a community who we really like being part of, and we get to talk about politics and history, right? All of these things are good. I love engaging here with you guys. I look forward to it every week for 189 weeks. But we are also doing work here. The simple fact that we're a community is work of a sort. It's just really good work. At any rate, what we are doing here is democracy personified. We are doing what you're supposed to do, asking questions, like coming up with maybe solutions, but more important than that, asking questions, interrogating things, deciding what we think about things, and sharing with each other to potentially change thoughts, shift thoughts, educate each other in one way or another. This is an important community doing important work, and I want to thank you for it. And I want to thank Annie and John, as ever, for being at the center of this community. I love you guys. I missed a week, and I know, and I was like, I missed a week. Anyway, okay. I am gonna stop talking so that John can put us into the after party. Actually, I'm gonna keep talking, but okay, things are happening. Facebook is gone.